Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 2, at least of today. Matthew and I back. Happy to be with you all. Today's afternoon podcast topic is going to be a good one because Matthew and I might not even necessarily agree on everything. People always say how you and I just agree on everything, and it's lame and it's boring. So, like, there's a possibility that today we have a disagreement, and that would be stellar.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's agree to disagree.
Yeah. Anyway, cool. So we're gonna talk about the topic is required shooting skills for concealed carriers and how you can measure those as well. Like what are the required shooting skills, and then how and what do you measure those by, so that you have, like, of course we can't ever guarantee that doing X will produce Y, as far as like if you can be Rob Latham, the greatest pistol shooter that's ever lived, and you can even have a sound knowledge of defensive tactics with his level of shooting skill, and you could there's still no guarantee that you walk away from a gunfight, right?
Absolutely.
So, but the point is, like, at some point we should be able to draw some lines and suggest, you might want to consider trying to have your shooting skill level here to have a reasonable expectation that you can perform well, when you're called upon to do so. Hello, Andrew and Randy and Dave. Hey, Dave and Charlie. Thanks for joining, guys. So, without further ado, I think we're going to jump right into it. Sound good?
Yeah, I'm all for it.
I'm looking forward to our debate.
I had one of those with Jacob on one of the episodes. So.
All right, here we go. In 3, 2, 1. This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, episode number 474. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network. I am your host, Riley Bowman, and I'm joined today by our producer and master of all things podcast related, except for a few things, I guess.
Pretty much everything, man. No, it's cool, man.
Matthew Maruster, in case you didn't recognize the voice.
I told you guys got a double dose, unfortunately, of me, so I know you're probably looking for Riley or for Jacob or some high-profile guest, but you got me, man.
Double trouble all in one day. So, guys, today's episode is going to be a great one. Today's topic is required shooting skills for concealed carriers. All right. I'm excited to talk about this because Matthew and I were hashing this out a little bit before we began recording, or before we started even the live broadcast. And we have different perspectives, that is for sure. And of course, the topic that we're really addressing today can be fairly broad if we, so choose. And there's a lot of different ways we can come at it. And it would be even more broad if we said something like required skills for concealed carriers and not required shooting skills for concealed carriers. And maybe we'll talk or tackle some other skills in a future episode, of a similar theme, if you will, but just less specific to the technical shooting part of the equation. But today's episode, before we get too deep into it, you should know, is sponsored by Guardian Nation. GuardianNation.com is a place for more. And what do you get with Guardian Nation? Well, first of all, the thing I'm most excited about is that you get access to a vast library of information and content in our members-only content library, which, by the way, is going through some good and exciting changes, and there'll be some more really great stuff coming in the relatively near future. So just know about that. All right. That's a big piece, right? So everybody, what I take, Matthew, from like talking to and getting to know our Guardian Nation members is they care about being responsible concealed carriers. They care about, this huge power that they have in as far as carrying a gun on their hip. And they want to know that they have what it takes to use it in a manner that's responsible, that's legal, that's appropriate for the conditions they might find themselves in. The shooting aspect is a huge piece, but it's still just a piece of a much bigger pie. And we know that the technical shooting skills in a chaotic, high stress defensive encounter, you need to be able to perform, instantly, on demand, and under pressure, right? With little preparation, moments leading up to that. So what I gather from our members, Matthew, is they really care about being as good as they can be in a variety of aspects. But guys, the access to our members only content, our video library, for instance, hugely valuable to take from that information, knowledge, training, and education to make yourself better. Secondly, access to our monthly Guardian Nation live broadcasts. And in fact, I can tease and tell you right now that next week on Tuesday, January 26th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, we're going to have our next GN live broadcast with special guest and former he's retired U.S. Army Special Forces soldier, as well as retired Chicago Police Department SWAT team, Matt Little. All right. He was on the podcast with me a few weeks back. Great guy with an awesome perspective. And he's a master class USPSA and IDPA shooter, working very hard and diligently to becoming, getting that elite level of grandmaster. I'm also working towards that myself. Anyway, Matt's going to be an awesome guest, and that's who we got lined up for next Tuesday evening, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. You're going to want to be a Guardian Nation member to be able to participate in and view that live and ask questions during that broadcast. Or if you can't make it live, well, then guess what? You have access to this massive library of Guardian Nation live events in the past with all kinds of awesome, awesome guests. I just mentioned two things, Matthew, and guess what? There's a ton of other benefits, including discounts, and also discounts off of the next thing I was going to mention as a sponsor episode today. You'll save big on things like training, including our upcoming first annual Guardian Conference later this year in September in Oklahoma City. We've already got a bunch of you signed up, which is awesome. And more of you are looking at it and considering it and getting ready to sign up. I know you are. And Guardian Nation members save, like, right now, especially off early bird pricing, like $300. That's significant. All right. So, guys, considering Guardian Nation to get today, if you want to take a little, a trial run at it for 14 days, go to concealedcarry.com/14day. And that's 14DAY. Okay, concealedcarry.com/14DAY will get you a 14-day free trial. You can check out Guardian Nation and see what it's all about. And again, I mentioned our Guardian Conference coming up in September of this year, our first annual event. This is something we plan on doing annually going forward. We anticipate it'll be a huge success. Everything's coming together and looking awesome. Guys, it is in Oklahoma City. It's actually the northeast side of Oklahoma City. September, was it 16, 17, 18, I think is the date, or thereabouts. And you're going to have the opportunity to train over a course of 3 days from instructors like Larry Vickers, Matt Little, Spencer Keepers, Brian Eastridge, Chuck Haggard, Haney Mahmood, myself, Matthew will be there. There's going to be a bunch of awesome stuff going on, great courses. There's more instructors. I don't have time to mention everybody. And there may even still be a few more that we add to the list. You guys are going to want to make sure you're there for this special event. 3 days of awesome training. all kinds of training from medical to legal to shooting. All right. Go to guardianconference.com to learn more and get signed up today. Take advantage of our early bird pricing that's available right now. Ghost Tactical on YouTube says he'll be there. Dude, we'd love to have you.
Nice.
It'd be awesome. All right. So Matthew, let's get into our topic today. Matthew just dropped out. We lost him. Let me introduce to you. He'll be right back, I'm sure, unless we had a catastrophic failure on the internet on his end. Today's topic is, again, required shooting skills for concealed carriers. This is something that, if I'm being honest and transparent, my buddy Sam Middlebrook at Red Hawk Firearms Training, he asked me about this in a text message the other day. And had a little bit of conversation going back. I sent him some ideas, and I actually have some more ideas for him as well. And that kind of, I was like, this would be a great topic for the podcast too. So here we are. We're talking about. I hit up Matthew, said, "Bro, like, put together some thoughts on what you think required shooting skills would be for your typical concealed carry person. Like, what do we really need skill-wise as it relates to the shooting of a gun, right? That's like the paramount event, not the thing that we hope for or that we are working towards as far as that's not anybody's goal. My goal is to avoid ever having to be in a deadly force encounter. But at the same time, it's that kind of the old adage of, hope for the best, plan for the worst, right? Mm-hmm. So I hope that never happens, but I also recognize in today's world, crap happens to good people, sometimes in decent places, meaning, we Matthew, we've covered justified save stories for years now. And some of those happen in neighborhoods you'd never imagine, or situations you'd never imagine those would happen in, including home break-ins and stuff, random stuff that happens on the street, random stuff that happens in the car, road rage incidents. Hopefully none of our people are instigators in kind of situation, but sometimes something can't be avoided. And that's the idea. For the things that I cannot avoid and that I can't find another way out of, that I can't de-escalate using verbal judo and my other communication skills and so forth, it comes down to that moment that I've got to put hand on gun, put it on target, and put rounds on that target. What do I need to be able to do skill-wise to achieve that? Matthew, I'd like to hear your first thoughts.
Yeah, so let me preface this. So when you gave me the task to come up with some ideas, of course my mind is going, Riley's going to have this pretty much laid out, right? Like all these skills, these pistols, shooting skills. I don't want to say the fundamentals, because we get like kind of into the doctrine of shooting, right? But my mind kind of like gradually expanded outside of like the technical skills, I guess. But right before we came on, you kind of said, hey, this is the focus that I'd like to focus on, and I still have some other ideas. But like overall, to answer your question, I guess it would be correct to say we need, at the very basic level, right? If we're going to use the firearm to defend ourselves, not in every situation are we going to need these skills, but in a vast majority of situations, we're going to need to be able to get the gun on target quickly and put successive rounds on the target accurately. And we can determine how accurate it needs to be, right? There's obviously, we talk about, self-defense shooting is a balance of speed and precision. So I think when we go through these skills, we're trying to focus on basically what are the skills that I need to be able to, in the majority of self-defense contexts, what are the skills necessary, baseline skills, and how do we quantify those? It's easy to kind of say, be able to draw the gun really quickly. Okay, well, what are the time frames and how do we practice those? Or, okay, you're saying I need be able to get multiple shots on target. How do I quantify how many shots and how long should it take, and these types of things. So hopefully when we go through these different skills, we can look at the different fundamental skills, and I don't want to use the term fundamentals, but these are fundamental skills that you would need, and how to go about practicing those skills in some sort of benchmark where you can compare yourself to others. And let me also just say, I think there's a vast or a super legitimate purpose to having benchmarks, right? But let's not get into the idea that if we establish or if we reach a certain number, right, that somehow I'm going to win every gunfight, or I've attained a certain level and therefore I don't need to practice anymore, or I'm good enough. Because I think once we get in the mindset of I'm good enough, we're actually hindering our performance and hindering getting better. There's a whole host. We're going to, Riley, you want to keep it very narrowly focused. And I think that's good, because I'll probably extend this off on tangents all night. So we'll keep it narrowly focused, but these aren't all the skills, right? These would be considered, I guess, the essential skills.
Yeah. Dude, you're spot on. And I appreciate you clarifying kind of some contextual things for our conversation today. I'm going to apologize in advance to folks listening. You might hear some background noise on my end. Some noisy kids outside my office door. So beware. I was trying to get them calmed down as you were doing your thing there. So I'm going to, let me set some of my own context, Matthew. So before we kicked off the show today, I mentioned to you, obviously it's a made up scenario, and it's a very probably overly simplified scenario. And I basically asked you the question, like, Matthew, imagine that you just stepped out, outside your door, like you went out on the sidewalk in front of your house or whatever, right? And all of a sudden, out of the blue, unexpected, and no understanding as to why, because this kind of thing happens too. Things that are unexplained and sudden and seemingly completely random happen all the time to people. But you step outside there, and all of a sudden, you just see this man who screams at you, profanely, and starts rushing at you while he's holding a weapon. Or maybe he starts drawing a gun, or whatever the context is. And let's just say he's 20, 30, 40, 50 feet. Honestly, the distance doesn't really matter. The fact is, you find yourself in an instant, later today or tomorrow, whatever it is, suddenly faced with this event that you never thought would happen, but yet here it is, and you've got seconds. We're talking 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 seconds tops to recognize, make the decision that, it's going down, grab gun, put on target, put rounds on target. Okay. That's kind of the way I set it up with you as we were conversing. And like, to me, that scenario, again, probably overly simplified, but there's probably situations like that, that do occur similar to that. And I basically was like, hey, bro, what are the core foundational skills? Like, what's the most basic level stuff you've got to be able to do to prevail in even the simplest imagined self-defense situation? Like, that's basically what that is. In fact, you want to make it real simple. Let's make it real simple. Let's just say you have a guy at 30 feet, 10 yards, Maybe it's 21 feet. I don't know. I don't care. Again, the distance isn't that critical. You've got a man standing there, makes threats to you, begins drawing a gun. And let's just throw out all excess variables and say, let's just say he's standing there getting ready to deliver rounds in your direction. And you're going to do the same. Okay? You have a limited amount of time. Get your gun on target and press the trigger. And there's no guarantee he won't hit you, right? He might not. You might be able to get rounds on target before he gets rounds on target. And that doesn't, keep in mind, that doesn't mean that you shoot first. That just means that you might get rounds on him before he gets rounds on you, meaning it's entirely possible that a round or two misses you. Okay. At the same time, maybe your skill's not what it should be. Maybe you're not paying attention to the things you need to be paying attention to in the moment. Maybe you overreact as far as you rush yourself and you rush the process and you try to rely on things like point shooting when maybe something a little more refined in terms of achieving a sight picture is required. And the point is, you could also miss shots on him, right? All right. So the simplest of circumstances, it's like a duel. Two men facing off. Let's just say 21 feet. It's going down, but he's the instigator because we're in a defensive context. So we've got to reply with our own use of force. Okay, what is required? Good hits on a human threat in a context like that. Like, I don't know. I'm going to throw it. You obviously have an idea where my mind is at because we had some conversation before this. But
yeah,
I want to hear from you. Like, what do you think is absolutely essential for you to expect to prevail in a situation like that?
Yeah, so I think what you kind of hit on was, at first, we need to be able to visualize the threat before we can even start coming up with a plan, right? So we visualize the threat, and part of that visualization involves presenting the firearm. Like you said, like, sure, there are instances where we're probably point shooting might win the day, but a skill that we need to be able to have, even if we don't need it in one situation, but is crucial, is the ability to not only pick up the information of the threat, but include our sights or our firearm in that equation, so we can properly target the threat. Whether that's, understanding the distance that you are and kind of knowing I need to use my sights at this distance or at this precision level versus I'm in close, but it's very visual. We have to start with the visual, I think, before we start to formulate what we're going to do, even getting the gun out at that point.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so you're not wrong in this at all. Obviously, we have to, like, this is sort of like touching on the whole OODA loop thing, as far as you got to observe, right? Like, you can't make decisions about something you're not aware is taking place or occurring. So you obviously have to be able to recognize the threat, see that threat, understand what's taking place. That's part of that orient process, right? And you're able to start considering options. Okay, decide this or that or this other thing. So like, what is the solution for the current situation I find myself in? So you're absolutely correct about that, and that's important. I'm thinking even more basic in terms of the problem, like the solving the shooting problem itself. Like, what is the shooting problem? Well, the shooting problem is, again, let's be specific. So let's just say it's the 7 yards, 21 feet. It's a very common distance that people use, and a lot of drills that are based off of that, and people shoot at that distance at the range all the time. 7 yards, you want to put rounds in high center mass, right? Ideally right in the heart area, in the heart region. what are you using for target? You could be using a USPSA 6 inches wide, 11 inches tall, using an 8-inch circle like an IDPA target down zero zone. You could be using something a little bit more precise than that, a 3x5 card, the black part of a NRA B8 target, which is a 5.5-inch diameter circle, your 9-ring on a B8 target. Whatever you think your standard, the better standard is the better standard, meaning that my heart, right, is like the size of my fist here in the high center, slightly left side of my chest, a little bit of an aorta stick. We got a little bit else to work with there that kind of sits above the heart, rides above the heart. Honestly, Dave Spalding's approach of using a 3x5 card turned vertically is pretty representational of what we want to be able to hit if we're going to get good hits on a heart-sized target at a distance like that. I don't really care. You decide what you think your standard needs to be. But in terms of just talking about what does it take to stand there and draw, and let's just say deliver 2 rounds to that hit zone. All right. So in other words, the standard is drawing our gun, getting it on target, and putting 2 rounds precisely where I want them. What did that take?
You asking me?
Skills. Yeah, man. Turn it back to you. This is a discussion, bro.
Yeah. So what does
it take to deliver 2 accurately placed rounds?
You need to be able to grip the gun effectively to manage the inevitable recoil that's going to happen. And you have to be able to, if you want to shoot quickly, you need to understand how the trigger works and how to cycle the trigger and take in the visual information of your sight. So when that sight picture, or however you're sighting, whatever sight system you're using, is an appropriate position on the threat, that your trigger's prepped and ready to go and you're firing off another shot, be able to manage that recoil and kind of take in the stimulus or the visual stimulus that's going on, so you can assess what's going on, whether your hits are effective or whether you're missing. So I think it starts with grip is huge, because if you can't grip the gun and kind of aim it in the right spot, even if whether you're using sights or not, if you can't grip it and control it as it goes through the cycle of operations, then you're pretty much you're doomed, because you won't be able to fire quick follow-up shots that are accurate.
Yeah. There's a lot of verbiage to say the following: grip the gun, hold it on target while you press the trigger without moving it.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's, in going back to what has now become a relatively well-known or famous video from Rob Latham on the Funker Tactical channel. And Tim Herron and I even kind of alluded or touched on this last week in the what I did with him. The Rob's point in that video was that until you can grip the gun firmly, or at least hold it in place, right, and press the trigger without moving the gun significantly, off target, then nothing else matters. That's why the title of that video is "Aiming is Useless." Aiming is useless when you can't do that, when you can't grip, when you can't hold the gun on target while you press the trigger, right? Because, and this is why people get so frustrated when they're trying to learn how to shoot, right? They see their sights on target and they press the trigger and the round doesn't go where they were looking. And they're like, what's up with that? And what am I doing wrong? We could get into the nitty-gritty of what specifically is occurring, like what's moving, what's causing it to move. There's a lot of different opinions and philosophies and doctrines about what that might be. But what I appreciate about a shooter and an instructor like Rob Latham is he boils everything down to its most basic nature. And basically, if you're in his class, this he'll ask questions like this all the time, where it's like, so where were you aiming? Oh, up here. But where'd your round go? Down there. How did it end up there? Why did it go there? I anticipated. I clenched or flinched. Like you're thinking through your head like all these different things it could be. You're thinking of that stupid pie chart that has all the different diagnosis things all the way around it. You're thinking about all that, and it's like, no, like you moved the gun there. You moved it off target when you press the trigger. Now we can dig in and try to figure out why you moved, but really the biggest thing that most shooters struggle with is just holding the gun still, relatively, right? We all have a little bit of wobble, right? But it's just holding the gun still and pressing the trigger. Like that's the biggest issue shooters have. And until you master that basic concept, nothing else matters. We could talk about, in other words, putting in the context of this imaginary gunfight we talked about a moment ago, 7 yards, 2 guys opposing each other, simple, straightforward situation. If you can't hold the gun still while you press the trigger as you're aiming that onto the chest of your adversary, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter if you take a sidestep on your draw. It doesn't matter if you try to do this while moving, because you're trying to incorporate moving because you recognize at 7 yards, that's a little close for comfort. I'm going to try to increase distance or make myself a little more difficult target to hit. It doesn't matter if you're trying to use cover. It doesn't matter if you're in a vehicle. Like nothing else matters, because if you continue messing up the process of firing the shot, then you're just giving your opponent more opportunities and more time until they solve the problem for themselves and hurt and get you. See what I'm getting at? So like nothing else matters than me being able to put rounds as early as I can in the gunfight, exactly where I want them, which is on my, the center of mass of my opposing threat. That's all that matters. And there's a really basic process to doing that, which is what we just talked about, right? Yes, I know there's all this other stuff, and we're going to talk about some more of what those essential shooting skills are. In fact, this is the point where I hand it off to you, Matthew, and you're welcome to add to or take away from what I just talked about. But I'd also like to hear from you, like what else you think would be relevant for, like, this is the episode we're talking about required shooting skills for concealed carriers.
Yeah. So I guess if I were to take, let's say we're talking to a student, I had, half an hour to talk to them and say, hey, these are the essential skills. I'd probably go and say, once you can grip the gun appropriately, you can point it where you want, pick up your sights, however you do it, squeeze the trigger, keep the rounds relative. And I think accuracy and how much you do of this is relative to the context of the situation, of course, right? How accurate you have to be in all this. But once you have an understanding and you can do that consistently, I think that we have to look at, you can put multiple shots on a single target quickly. What about potential of multiple targets, target transition? Because it may not necessarily be, transition doesn't necessarily need to be a transition from a target to another separate target. It could be transitioning as that target is moving, right? That threat is moving, or as you're moving. So if we work on transitions, it's kind of, I think it helps us in 2 ways. One, transition from a target to another separate target, but also be able to track targets and move the gun through space and still have a relationship of where the target is. So I would say working on some sort of transition would be definitely beneficial.
Yeah. So you're just going down that road of like, what else comes, you're sort of putting ourselves in the position of what are some of the real life gunfights that we have seen? You know, the stuff we've seen captured on camera, surveillance video, stories people have told, whatever, right? And the fact of the matter is, the reality is that very rarely is a gunfight static, right? In fact, almost never, if ever. So the point is that things are moving, people are moving, people are ducking, dodging, and twisting, turning, and running, right? As this fight is taking place, because that's what people do. We're trying to avoid getting hit. We're trying to avoid getting hurt. Trying to position ourselves where we can dole out the pain and hurt on the other person, because that's the way we put the fight to an end. And so you're exactly right in that things like a transition, and I've talked about this before, and I really truly believe in this. I mean, it's really cool if you can train on a target system that has like a running man, target set up, where like a target can, be moved back and forth, from your left to your right and vice versa and stuff like that. Or for, like, I've even seen some really, really high end stuff that can do all kinds of fancy stuff, really expensive, multi-million dollar shooting ranges. But most people don't have access to that kind of stuff. And the reality is, you don't even need that to learn the relevant skills necessarily. Practicing transitions between multiple targets is basically what it's like shooting a moving target, because although the most realistic thing we can do is where we have multiple targets set up, and we focus on just putting one round on each, okay, with the transitions in between, because that's very, very similar to and as long as you can do that while with the gun moving as little as possible, that's going to be very similar to the test you'll be faced with a moving target in the real world. Meaning that you're tracking, you see your sights on target, you press trigger, and you're moving on to the next target, and you're repeating that process again. That's the beginning, that's the basis of learning how to acquire multiple targets. And every time you acquire a sight picture on a moving target, that's what it is. Here's a sight acquisition. Here's a sight or a sight picture. Here's a sight picture. Here's a sight picture. Here, so that's what you're dealing with. So I'm gonna back up a little bit and say that that you're right. And you talked a little bit about vision too. Here's what I would say. So after a person has figured out how to grip a gun and not move the gun while they press the trigger, and by the way, one of the things that I find helps people in learning how to do that is actually by removing the vision piece to some degree. And by that, I mean, don't worry about the aiming. In fact, I've worked with students where I've just had them shoot into the berm. I'm like, just shoot into the berm behind the targets. In other words, you don't care what you're actually aiming at. What you're focused on is just holding the gun still as you work the trigger. And when we take the target away and we take, this whole idea of trying to focus on, very finite things and see everything in alignment and trying to hold it there and press the trigger, that's sometimes, for a lot of shooters, that's what sets them up for that anticipatory type flinch. Because there's this anxiety that builds up that you're trying to get things lined up. You're trying to aim and you're like, oh, there it is. Send it now. In the process of trying, like, by the time the vision, of seeing sight, say rear sight, front sight, target, and everything lined up the way you want it, by the time that visual image gets to your brain processing center and makes a decision, yep, now it's time, and sends a signal down to the trigger finger to go press trigger, things have already moved again, right? And so either you've already moved off target by the time you're pressing the trigger, or the anxiety and that sudden, like, oh, it's good, go now. A lot of times that creates this tension and this pressure, which translates into our hands and our arms and our finger, and we go snatch, and down and left that shot goes, as is common for a lot of shooters. So just removing the vision piece, not being concerned about the aiming so much, and just focusing on holding things steady as you press the trigger, that fixes a lot of issues for a lot of shooters from what I've seen.
Mhm.
But now we got to bring that vision piece back in. We've got to aim the gun, right? That is, so talking about required shooting skills, Matthew, grip, trigger, without moving the grip, and now we got to aim that thing where we want it.
Mhm.
Right? That's not rocket science. That's, if you got front sight, rear sight, well, you should have the idea that, equal height, equal light, put that on target. It's not rocket science. You can go back and even listen to the episode I did with Charlie Perez a while back about, we really got into some of the vision piece and sights and focus and all that. But in terms of just aligning things and putting on target, press and trigger, like, it's not rocket science. Or you have a red dot and you just put dot on target and press trigger, right? Easy to go. Or it's easy. Simple, maybe not always easy. That's the distinction that guys like Rob Latham make, and it's a very true statement. Shooting is simple, doesn't mean it's easy, right?
Mhm.
Because we are our own worst enemies. But anyway, so we bring the vision piece back in. And the thing that I'm believing is becoming a more relevant skill than what I used to think, and what I think a lot of defensive shooters and trainers, particularly, because I don't hear this talked about a lot in defensive training contexts, and that is the idea of having a level of awareness, okay, primarily visually, meaning that you're observing sights, target, and the situation at a place where you see everything that as it's occurring, and you recognize it for what it is. And that's sort of like the beginning process for learning how to call shots. Now, we can debate this, because you could totally be like, Riley, bro, you're getting way off, you're off the rails here. Why are we talking about shot calling with something like, a more entry level concealed carry, student shooter? Like, isn't that an advanced skill? And I would say it kind of is, because we do need some things to happen with some level of automaticity, right? Like, we can't be thinking so much about what I'm doing with my grip and what I'm doing with my trigger finger, and what am I doing with the sights. And we can't be really thinking about that, very consciously, those things, to then be able to see things at a level where we can start calling shots. So we need there to be some subconscious competence to the performance of grab gun, hold, steady, press trigger. But my goal is to get shooters to this level of visual awareness and calling shots much earlier in their development as a shooter, because it's super critical, I think, to, like, the end goal is threat, and I need to put rounds on that target, that threat target. Everything is just theory, unless I get some kind of feedback loop that tells me exactly, that what I'm doing is working.
Mhm.
Right? Because otherwise it really is. It's just theory. If you are putting sights on target and you see that there, you push the trigger, and you're like, well, I think it went there. I saw this, and I'm pretty sure that's where my round goes. But yet, still, we find shooters that are surprised by results, both good and bad. They're like, oh, wow, that's better than I thought. I thought it was all over the place. And you have other shooters that are like, I thought my aiming was on point. I thought everything was good. And look at my group. It's all over the place. Right? So it's all just theory until you have certainty where your rounds are actually impacting. And the way you develop that knowledge of where your rounds are going is by that instantaneous visual feedback through your sighting system that says, this is where it was at the precise moment that I pressed the trigger and it went bang.
Yeah, and
You there, that takes a little bit of work.
no, and I think you said, well, maybe it's too much of a higher skill level. I don't like I can see the argument for saying that, but I think it's fundamental the fact that in a self-defense, remember we're talking about a self-defense context. You're not going to have a steel plate that rings. You're not going to see a hole, right? You're not going to have blood squirting out and say, oh, that was a center mass hit. There's so much visual stimulus that you're taking in auditory that you're not going to be able to say, okay, well, I need to adjust and shoot 2 inches to the right because that was over here. I think being able to call your shots on the range in an understanding of how your sights look compared to where the round impacts then allows you to, if you need to use your firearm in a self-defense context, right? And you're not getting that an instantaneous, black spot on the guy's white shirt or what it might be. How are you getting feedback? Well, you're looking and seeing, are my shots having any sort of effect on this person? How do you do that? Well, are they starting to stop their attack? Are they starting to recoil in pain, cover up certain parts of their body? And so I think being able to have some context, right, or being able to have some understanding of how do my sights look when I'm not being attacked, and where do the rounds go when I'm squeezing the trigger this way? I'm shooting this quickly. Where are they going? Gives you the ability to say, when I don't see those holes and I'm just seeing a reaction, that confidence that, yes, I am getting my hits, even though I don't see them, because you've had that positive reinforcement on the range. And I think that's one of the good things about shooting steel and things like that you get positive reinforcement, because I think sometimes when we're shooting, we focus on the misses and the bad ones, and we focus on how I must have been anticipating or overreacting or squeezing or whatever it might be. And then we don't take the time to stop and say, wow, I just got a good hit. What did that feel like when I squeezed the trigger that time? And what did I see that time? And build those kind of visions in your mind. So that's kind of like what your go-to is, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, we do have to be careful with steel targets because they can create laziness, right?
Right.
But I get what you're saying, and I would say that at one time I was definitely where you're at, what you're describing to me. But I would say that the change in training mindset that's occurred within me is that I get the thrill, if you will, from instant feedback when I know I am that I'm calling shots. Like, in other words, and by that, what I mean is when I know I'm seeing everything that I need to see that's relevant to the operation and the shooting of the gun, that tells me that my rounds are going where I intend them to go. Like in that instant, regardless if I got a ping on steel or saw a hole on paper, in that precise moment, I go, yes, it is such an awesome feeling when you first experience that idea of shot calling. I don't know. I'm trying to think I remember the first time this occurred for me, and I was so excited because it was like, holy crap, like my whole world opened up, because it's like, whoa, like the confidence level, you can't even imagine it. Confidence level goes from like level 0 to 100, just like that, because you're like, because again, everything up to that point was theory. I'm doing everything I know I'm supposed to do, and that tells me it should work. But that moment that you see it work in that instant is like, it is so powerful. It is life changing in terms of your shooting. Now, again, required shooting skills for concealed carriers. It is, there's a lot of other things we could be talking about. Okay. And I recognize that it takes some time and some level of subconscious performance to achieve some of the things we're talking about. But my perspective on shooting performance as it relates to whether it's competition or another high stress event, which is a self-defense situation, this is where I really, really want to get people to be, because you are a different shooter when you are in this place that we're describing, meaning you have all the requisite foundational skills. You know your grip is solid. You know that you are able to hold things steady as you press that trigger. Your trigger work is not a problem. You know you have no problems aiming. In fact, the aiming happens so subconsciously you don't even think about it. It just happens because all of your mental capacity is on observing what's taking place, and you see it happen, and you know what the results are before. In fact, here's the crazy thing, Matthew. You actually, if you're calling your shots, you actually know when it's a good shot before that round actually hits the paper, right? Because there's some amount of time between bullet being ignited and thrust down the barrel and exiting that barrel and actually impacting the target. The greater we increase that distance, the more obvious that difference in time is. But even if it's a couple of milliseconds, like I saw it happen in that instant, and I didn't even have to look at the paper. I knew in that moment it was good. And that is a huge, huge game changer in your shooting performance. If that's the level that you're at, everything else becomes almost easy in a way. I shouldn't say that, but it kind of does.
Let me play the devil's advocate for 1 second here. All right. So what if I'm listening and I'm saying, all right, well, I watch a lot of videos of shootings and stuff, and the people that I see in the videos, they're not very well trained. They probably haven't had much training. They look like they're just whipping a gun out and pointing it and, shooting rounds, and they're able to save themselves. So, isn't that good enough? Don't I just need to be able to point shoot, get a couple rounds off, better have like a 45 or something because it only takes one shot, and you know what I'm saying? So that's my, so what would you say to those people?
Yeah.
Not those people, right? I'm not saying it that way. I'm just saying
people. No, you're right, because we do have to recognize that there are people that get lucky every day in defending themselves. And that's how I would describe it. Well, maybe some people don't believe in luck. Let's just say that the shooting probably require a lot, and they did just enough to prevail that day, right? That is true. That sometimes happens. Sometimes all it takes is a random round fired. It could be in the direction of the bad guy, but it doesn't actually hit him. Like it could go into the ground for all I know. But that's enough to deter that bad guy, right? It's essentially a warning shot that succeeds in stopping the fight. I'm not advocating for warning shots. I'm just saying that there are definitely fights that the presence of the gun being drawn out of the holster, and they see it and go, oh crap, I didn't sign up for this today. We're good. See you later. Have a nice day. Right. So yeah, there's this huge spectrum of potentially deadly force encounters that exists, all the way from the most basic encounter where the most the simplest sign of force or resistance is all it takes to get that bad guy to go, I don't want this fight today, all the way up to the hardened criminal that is intent on hurting you or getting whatever it is that his end goal is. And no matter what you do, he's not like it will require death for him to cease his actions. So there's that huge spectrum, and all throughout that you have civilian encounters where the most crappy but basic shooting skills is all it's necessary to stop the fight that day. But at the same time, there's going to be situations where that same level of skill and performance isn't enough. So
Jack Wilson.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's such a like a pinnacle performance level. You could argue, well, he might have got lucky, or God bless that bullet, or whatever. Like that doesn't even matter. The fact is like that's like the pinnacle of lots of people that have the potential of getting hurt. Dude, that's already actively killing people, and you fire one bullet and it strikes him exactly in the noggin where it needs to and puts him out for the fight instantly. Like, yes, exactly. So it's hard to draw the line at what is good enough.
Mm-hmm.
But I was reminded, Matthew, from the podcast episode I did with Carl Wren, who authored the book Strategies and Standards for Defensive Handgun Training, which I don't always agree with everything that Carl says or his approach on everything. But this book is a really interesting book. And he the way he talks about some of these drills and standards is really quite an interesting concept. Camera's out of focus here. Maybe it'll refocus. I don't know. But he also pulls from this a chart from a guy named John Hearn, who, if John Hearn happens to be in the sound of my voice, I'd like to have you on the podcast. I plan on reaching out to John, and I don't know John. I know of John and know of his work, and it's probably about time we get him on the podcast. But John Hearn did this chart called Typical Performance and Automaticity Speculation. And the idea is, at least how I see it, is the measure of your like the level of your automaticity, okay, or like your ability to perform something, like how automatic you're able to do that is a predictor of what you'll be able to do under stress, right? How well you'll be able to perform, because it's true in a lot of other areas of life. Your ability to be a good driver, a good defensive driver, one that's able to avoid things, like we could predict that based on, we could analyze your driving performance and how subconsciously competent you are in your driving skill, and predict Matthew's probably going to be able to avoid, this little girl running out into the street as he's coming down the street, because he'll see her, recognize her, and instantly apply the things he needs to do to stop or avoid her. Because the point is if you are not able to shoot at a level where, or if you are still shooting at a level where you have to think about all these little things, grip, my trigger, how I'm holding my upper body or my arms or my stance, or, like if you have to think about all these things, then that would be a pretty good indicator that you would struggle a little more during a stressful situation, right? So anyway, back to this chart. It's a really interesting chart because it, and again, it's called Typical Performance and Automaticity Speculation. And essentially what it does is it's a combination of a bunch of different drills and qualifications, like an FBI qual, El Presidente, the Federal Air Marshal's qualification, things like the casino drill that is pretty popular. Tom Givens over at Rangemaster came up with that. Then it has USPSA classifications, D, C, B, A, Master, GM, and also IDPA classifications like Master and Expert and so forth. And it kind of ranks all these things. And the idea here, and John's just a really smart guy, and so he spent a lot of time studying this and kind of put together this spectrum, this matrix, if you will, of how does all of this compare? And then let's try to figure out what skill level suggests automaticity, the ability to automatically perform complex skills. Shooting a gun is complex. There's a lot going on, right? So based on this, what I would suggest actually is right in the middle of this chart. I'm going to hold it up for the screen. I know those of you listening can't see this, but here's the chart right here. The 50% mark of that chart, right down the middle, is USPSA B class. It's just a little bit below IDPA Expert. I'd suggest, I'd posit the theory that if you can perform at that level, USPSA B class shooter, IDPA expert, what is that also equivalent to? That's a passing score on the Federal Air Marshal's qualification. That's a 240 on the FBI Bullseye qualification. That's a 3-second build drill. That's about a 7.5-second fast test. Okay, some of you guys might not be familiar with everything I just mentioned there, but I'd say that according to this, it suggests that you are performing at some level. You have some automaticity in terms of your level of performance. Okay, so why is that relevant? If you have performance automaticity in a certain skill, then that is an indicator that you have cognitive function available for other stuff. That other stuff is analyzing the fight that's taking place and solving the problem. And the shooting happens more or less automatically. That, I think, is the distinction, Matthew. I don't know. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no,
you're more devil's advocate if you have it. But no, that's where I'm at with that.
Yeah, I totally agree, because and this is the reason why I asked you that question earlier is because I get a lot of those questions from concealed carriers, like, oh, well, how good do I have to be? And I'm like, well, and they'll cite those people that, they don't have training, they save them the day, right? And I sort of break it down, and I don't have all the same vocabulary words that you do, but in my in my explanation, I think how I explain it is that we can do more if we can automate those basic skills that we were just talking about. We can do more, and that allows us to basically do it better, have a higher probability of surviving, or have a lower probability of missing and injuring somebody else, or putting somebody else in harm's way through our actions. So, and we have a higher probability of making the right calls as far as when to shoot, when not to shoot, how many rounds to shoot. And so we just do it better. So we give ourselves a better chance when we can focus on those variables that we can't control, and we kind of automatize or get those other skills to a point where they're at an acceptable level. And I don't want to say good enough, but a level where they do have some automation. So our brains, because if I'm sure you do the same thing. You tell students at a concealed carry, brand new students, and you're like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And they're like, wow, that's a lot to take in. Okay, well, now we're going to talk about what if the guy's moving? What if you're moving? What if there's two? And they're like, wow, how do you check your backdrop when I'm so concerned about, my stance? And so it's just information overload. And I think we can do it better, like, if we can automate those things.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's the point. Thank you. I appreciate your perspective on that as well. Again, when we talk about shooting skills, there's a lot more we could get into, right? There's a lot of, so like it's implied, and we touched on it, drawing the gun, like, because frankly, okay, to my point, my earlier point, I said, nothing else matters if you hold the gun still, you press the trigger. Well, also nothing else matters if you can't get the gun out of the holster in the first place, right? So obviously draw is absolutely a critical skill. If that doesn't happen at a level of automaticity, right? If you haven't put in thousands of repetitions of practicing your draw, you're probably not there yet, to be frank with you, okay? It's something I still continue to work on, and I think it's a very quickly perishable skill. It perishes, I think, faster than just about anything that I do, is my ability, particularly to draw at speed from concealment, because there's just so much coordination that's going on, right? Getting my shirt and jacket or whatever out of the way, getting my hand to the gun, repeatedly, was a good index on the grip, all of that. Like, there's just so much going on. It takes a lot of practice, I think, to maintain it at a high level. Now, I know that I perform at a good level, no matter what. because I believe statistics would show that if you can draw and put an accurate hit on target in 1.5 seconds or less, you're in pretty good shape. There's some problems you can't solve with a 1.5 second draw, but the vast majority of problems you can probably solve with a 1.5 second draw. Okay. I'm constantly striving to keep mine at a consistent 0.9 to 1.0 second or faster, but trying to maintain right around just under a second. Like, that's really where I want to be. It takes consistent and continuous work to maintain that. So there's weeks I don't dry fire as much. Oh man, I could tell. Okay. The point is that it takes work. All these things do, but draw and yeah, it absolutely does. So let me just, we're kind of running out of time, but I want to propose to you. I want to kind of get your take on this stuff, Matthew, and I'd like to hear from you if you think if these standards are reasonable or not, or if they're good measures of shooting performance and ability, and if you think that they're reasonable based on, like we're talking about competent citizen defenders, right? Not necessarily, because you don't necessarily have to be a USPSA grandmaster or master class shooter. Even you don't have to be a top SWAT police officer or special forces soldier or whatever, right? But here, if we talk about shooting skills that are important for concealed carriers, it's important that we then also are able to measure whether we are able to actually measure those skills, right? To determine if we're competent or not with those skills. So let me throw out a couple drills to you. Let's start with the draw. I mentioned one just a moment ago. What do you think about a 1.5 second draw? And let's be more clear. Let's say 7-yard target, USPSA A zone. That's the standard 1.5 seconds.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly doable, and I think if you attain that level, it shows that you have an understanding of the mechanics that it takes and the coordination, and enough to not have that be this focal point of your shooting. You know what I mean? Like, I can get the gun out in a second and a half. That means I'm not really thinking. It's pretty much automated. Sure, I can refine it and do better, but yeah, I assess this. I have the skills in the understanding, pretty much.
Yeah. Let me also clarify just one thing real quick too. That when I say a 1.5 second draw, I mean like you can do it on demand.
Like cold.
Right? Cold, absolutely. Because that's what we're talking about, right? Like you don't get warm up draws when you suddenly are faced with a deadly threat.
Right.
So if you are going to consistently on demand perform at a 1.5 second draw level, it doesn't mean that you manage to get to a place where your average in practice is 1.5 seconds. It's probably more like your average is closer to 1.25, 1.3. Okay. If I'm being frank and honest, right? Because your average is going to have to be better than 1.5 if you're going to, with certainty, on demand, without question, always be able to deliver a 1.5 second draw. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think that's important for people to understand. Like, that's what I'm talking about here, is that your on-demand performance, it has to be 1.5 or better. And for it to be on demand every time, then your average, what you should be seeing in your practice sessions is 1.3, 1.35, okay? That sort of area, all right? Because sometimes you fumble things, right, on the draw. And, maybe your average draw is a 1.3, but you fumble a little bit, but you're still able to get it out in 1.5, that kind of thing.
And also we got to talk about, like, throw in the variables. You might, in wintertime, you might be wearing gloves that may slow, that may factor in, you know what I mean? So I think getting a baseline, not just like t-shirt, perfect day out, but also, buttoned up shirt, maybe a little bit more deeper concealment, or a heavy sweater and a jacket or something like that.
Yep. And keep in mind that all these standards I'm going to run through real quick I'm implying from concealment. or really, like, these should be your standards from whatever way or method you typically carry. Okay, which for most of you is concealed. All right. Okay, another standard: build drill, 3 seconds. Build drill shot at 7 yards, either on a USPSA A zone or IDPA 8-inch, down zero zone. Build drill from the draw, 3 seconds. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the build drill is probably the best indicator, I think, or I don't want to say the most realistic, because none of the drills are scenarios, but it's probably the most encompassing of the basic skills necessary to point, squeeze the trigger, and keep the rounds where you want them to go, right? Because you're shooting multiple shots. So I think 2.5, 3 seconds consistently is performing, is a good benchmark to get to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and let me give you an idea of where, or at least give the listeners where some of the logic for these times comes from. And my approach is sort of like what I consider a 75% performance factor. And by that, it's like you take your top level shooters and do a 75% performance factor of them. So from concealment, I mean, arguably, like, a grandmaster shooter in some of these areas are definitely going to be faster than what I suggest. But like in the case of a build drill, the sub 2 second build drill is like your golden standard. And, that your GM level shooters, your master level shooters typically as well, are going to have no problem with performing at that level. So you take a 75% factor of that, and that puts you at 3 seconds. A 50% factor is 40. Now, why am I suggesting that? I'm suggesting that because I think these are reasonable times to strive for, and I have a great deal of confidence that if you can perform at these times that we're mentioning, that you are well on your way to being able to perform with a level of subconscious competence or automaticity when you are faced with a stressful event. Okay, so build drill, 3 seconds. Okay, and by that I mean clean, consistent. All right, draw 6 rounds, all in the A zone or the down zero zone. Do it consistently in sub 3 seconds. That's probably honestly that's a stretch for a lot of shooters that I see, but I know it's absolutely doable. Okay, next one. I'm going to throw out the Gila Haze 5x5 drill, and particularly the one that's adapted by Claude Warner and Greg Elfritz. And the adaptation is basic. So here's the 5x5 drill. The 5x5 drill is a 5-inch circle placed at 5 yards, and you have 5 seconds to draw and put 5 rounds in that 5-inch circle. And you should be able to do that consistently with no misses. Do it clean. Okay. If you can do that 5 times, okay, 25 shots, draw 5 rounds in a 5-inch circle in 5 seconds at 5 yards, and do it 5 times, that's a really good indicator that you're a competent shooter. Okay, it's very doable. Some shooters will struggle with it for sure, especially doing it 5 times and doing it clean, but it's very doable. Okay, the time is generous enough to do it. It's really an exercise of discipline. You have to have discipline to stay on your sights and just keep, just staying in the moment, focused on what you're doing. So I don't know. What do you think about that? And this doesn't have a scoring factor. I'm suggesting you should be able to do the 5x5 drill 5 times clean.
Yeah, totally. I mean, distance-wise, shot zone-wise, what we're targeting, 5-inch circle. I think that, and again, I just want to preface or qualify that none of these drills are scenarios. So, you know what I mean? Like, these are working on specific skills. And I think that if you do them all, or if you work on all of these, you're amassing the skills and getting to a point where you can understand, hey, maybe I'm good at the build drill, but I really stink at the 5x5, or vice versa. And so that will, maybe indicate that, hey, I need to work on these skills a little bit more because I have these kind of, I'm got these down pretty well, and this is kind of where I'm struggling. I think these drills can expose different things that we can work on to make us more comprehensive shooter.
Yeah, and you're spot on. They're just tests. What did I say? I said that these are suggested drills that we can use to measure our level of shooting competence.
Yep.
And that's all it is. Okay. But based on these standards, and pretty well proven standards, we can have reasonable confidence, a reasonable level of confidence that if you can achieve things at these levels that we're suggesting, you're generally well prepared to perform in a sticky situation. Here's another one. The test drill, or the 10-10-10 drill is another name for it. This is the drill that was developed, I believe, by Ken Hackathorn and also adapted, or well, I don't know. I know that they both kind of give credit for each other, Ken Hackathorn and Larry Vickers. And what it is 10 yards on a NRA B8 target. So it's a scored target. You have an X ring, a 10 ring, a 9 ring, and an 8 ring. And I think in Larry Vickers' case, if you hit outside the 8 ring, that's Bill Blowers. I think Larry Vickers really wants you to get everything at least in the black. I know Bill Blowers counts anything outside the 8 ring. That's a fail. Like you're done. Like, sorry, bro. Like it's, but anyway, so 10-10-10 drill, 10 shots, 10 seconds on an NRA B8 and score it. And you should be able to shoot a 90 or better. Okay. Excellent is considered 95 or better. I really like to see 95 or better for my shooters, but I would consider you generally competent if you can consistently score a 90 or higher on the test. And I recommend actually doing this from the holster, which is technically referred to as the advanced test, because traditionally the test is shot from like a low ready. But you should, you have plenty of time, 10 seconds par time, 10 yards, relatively generous target. Okay. I mean, you can drop 5 rounds into the 8 ring and still get a 90. Okay. So that's the test. What do you think about that one in the scoring standard?
Yeah, good scoring standard, and I think similar to the 5x5. It's really like tests your discipline and your ability to like control what you're doing, I think. But you know what I mean? Because we kind of push ourselves and like, oh, and you'll see people like shoot the whole thing in like 6 seconds. And you're like, dude, you had like almost another 50% of your time. So it really is understanding your skills and your ability, I think, to a certain point. Understanding yourself. I don't want to get too like...
Yeah. It's another test of discipline for sure, because there is that tendency, particularly after you get to about your 4th or 5th shot, you see almost everybody does it, where they pick up that pace a little more. And some of that's understandable, because as you see, like as you're going through it, you're like, that was good. And like you kind of get this rhythm, and you're just like, well, if that was good, I can probably do the next one a little bit faster. And you just kind of keep picking up speed. For me, I've actually spent the last couple times I did the test, I actually did everything I could to try to get between 9 and 10 seconds, which is really hard. Because for one, you feel like you're going slow, but at the same time, you don't want to blow the par time. Because I consider if you blow the par time, it's a fail. Like you're done. Okay, that's just the way I approach it. And forcing myself to try to nail that 9 to 10 second window is a really great challenge in discipline, and just really staying with it and focused on the base fundamentals. Again, I hate using that word sometimes, but of shooting skill. And so that's a really, really good one. I mean, it obviously feels better when like, well, if I can score a 98 or 99 or 100 and do it in 5.5 seconds, that feels even better than doing it in 9.5 seconds. That's true. And there's no harm in like continuing to push the speed envelope. sign of that as long as you're consistently passing the test. But it also can be beneficial to try to not go fast as well, is I guess kind of what I'm trying to say. One thing that I think the test is really good at showing people, Matthew, is how it goes back to that very basic thing we talked about in the beginning, is how good their grip and ability to hold steady as they press the trigger is. Because if you have a flinch issue with the test, it will manifest itself absolutely. And running a student on a drill like the test will tell me a lot about the kind of shooter they are. I mean, obviously by observing them, but as far as what are they doing with their hands and their trigger, like looking at it from that level, but even looking at hits on target, it's like it is very diagnosable a lot of times. So that's a favorite of mine. Now here's another one, the FBI qual with a score of 90 or better. Okay. That's very doable because the target is quite generous. All right. Any opinions on that, Matthew?
No, I can't. I can't add anything. It's a good, well-rounded,
Yep.
course of fire.
All the different distances, from like 3 or 5 all the way back to 25 yards. There's time components, there's draws, there's reloads, et cetera, et cetera. And a little bit of change of, positional shooting at the end from 25. You shoot standing, you shoot kneeling. This is the new FBI qual I'm referring to. That's the one that scores out of 100 points. Every shot worth 2 points, 50 rounds. You can drop 5 of those, 2 points apiece, still scores 90. And I mean, honestly, I like to see shooters do better than 90 because I think it's very doable. But if you can score 90 on the new FBI qual, that's a pass, and it's a sign that you're pretty competent. All right, here's another one: the Bill Wilson 5x5 drill. I think this one is actually one of the more well-rounded drills. It's comprehensive. It's 4 stages. It starts off with basically like a bill drill kind of approach. So at 10 yards, shot on an IDPA target. So your down 0 zone is an 8-inch circle in the high center chest. You draw and you fire 5 rounds from 10 yards. Everything's done from 10 yards, by the way, on the 5x5. And it's funny, we have two 5x5 drills. Just the distinction there, the Gila Haze one, and then this is the Bill Wilson one. Bill Wilson, again, draw 5 rounds. Okay. And then you record the time. Your second stage is you draw and you fire 5 rounds, strong hand only. Okay, or one hand only. Record the time. Your third stage is 10 rounds, and it's like a repeat of stage 1, but a reload in the middle. So you draw, you put 5 rounds on target, you perform a slide lock back reload, and you fire 5 more rounds. And then your fourth stage is 4 rounds to the body and 1 round to the head, which on an IDPA target I think is a 4-inch circle. Although I've run this many times just using a 3x5 card. It's pretty similar using that standard. So that's the Bill Wilson 5x5. It's a very well-rounded test. And you take your aggregate time of all those 4 stages plus any penalties, dropping them in the down 1, you add a second. Drop them into like essentially the D zone, but in the case of IPA target, it's a down 3. You add 3 seconds. If you can do the Bill Wilson 5x5 drill in 20 seconds or less, that's pretty good. Okay. Yeah. I would probably still consider 25 seconds or less a sign of competency. Okay. If you can't get it in under 25 seconds, get to work. Find out where you're struggling the most, and really get to work on it. Any thoughts on Bill Wilson 5x5?
Yeah, I was actually going to say 25 seconds, but that's just because I'm not as good as a shooter as you. But no, I just say, but like I think 25 is respectable, and as long as you're doing it consistently at 25. I think that shows a good competency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My personal goal. Well, my first personal goal is to be able to do it one day in like 12 seconds. The best I've done is about 15 and a half. 15. I've done about 15. It's been a while since I looked at my my scores on that, but and that's spicy. That is moving. Okay, you got a reload in there and 4 draws, and right there alone you have 4 draws at 10 yards. So those are all for sure second draws for me from concealment. So that's 4 seconds just in draws. So it's funny, you can do all the math. You can really kind of start adding up and figuring out, where are my biggest opportunities for improvement? Because if you're taking 2 seconds to draw, by golly, if you can knock off a half second each of your 4 draws on that drill, that's 2 seconds you chop off right off the bat, right? If you can knock off 4 seconds, that's 4 seconds, right? So yeah, really good drill. And a related drill to that is I say related, is the fast test, which is 7 yards, 3x5 card for a head target and an 8-inch circle for a body target, designed by Todd Lewis Green. And you draw and you put 2 rounds in the head, you reload, slide lock reload, and then you put 4 rounds into the body. I say it's related to the Bill Wilson 5x5 because to me it tests a lot of the same skills. The Bill Wilson's a little bit more comprehensive, but they're similar. But the gold standard with the fast test is being able to do the whole thing in 5 seconds or less, which is very challenging. The standard I want to see shooters be able to do the fast test at is about 7.5 seconds, which I think is very doable. If you do the math, you can take a second and a half to draw to your first shot. Okay. And you can take a half-second split even between the first shot and the second shot in the head. And you're going to be sitting right at 2 seconds. Even if you took 2 seconds to reload, you'd be at 4 seconds. And you still have 3.5 seconds to fire 4 more shots into a pretty generous target. It's very doable. So, but if you can do it in 7.5 or less, you're a pretty competent shooter.
Yeah, I would agree. 7.5. Yeah, I think if I recall, he has like a standards where he ranks it out. I can't remember the exact, but I think we're right around 7.5 seconds is like the above average or something. Can't remember. Maybe I should look at it.
Yeah, that's actually a good question. It's been a while since I looked at that part, but while I'm considering that, I want to fill out one wild card drill. It's a newer drill, which is why it's not as well established as some of these others we've mentioned, but it's a very good drill, and I got to give my man props, and that is Scott Zielinski with his black belt standards. So let me explain what those are real quick. You start at 3 yards, and you put 3 rounds into the body of a USPSA target, 3 rounds into the body, and then you put 2 rounds into the head, okay, at 3 yards. You go back to 7 yards, and it's a one-shot draw. 7 yards, put 1 round into the body. Go back stay at 7 yards and shoot a build drill, okay, 6 rounds. And then you go back to 25 yards, and you draw and fire 1 shot from 25. Now, the goal is shooters want to achieve is black belt standard, which is the 3 and 2, which is the first one at 3 yards. You want to be sub 2 seconds. 1 shot draw, sub second. Build drill, sub 2 seconds. And 25-yard 1 shot draw, sub 1.5. It's a very challenging standard. There's still only a handful of guys that have done this one in the history, in current history. I think 8 or 9. But what I was going to say is, if you look at, Scott has a chart on his website, so black belt is the standards I just mentioned. Then he lists a brown, a purple, and a blue belt. And so what I would say is, if you look at his blue belt standards, he has build drill there listed at 3 seconds and a 7-yard 1 shot at 1.5. Well, that seems to be pretty well in line with what I've been suggesting for a lot of this. If you can achieve the blue belt standard of Scott Zielinski's black belt standards test, So 3 seconds at the 3 and 2 at 3 yards. That's the 3 to the body, 2 to the head. 1.5 one shot draw at 7 yards. 3 second build drill and a 2.25 second 25 yard one shot. Then I would use that as a standard to say you're a competent shooter.
Absolutely.
So we're probably well over time, but I don't know, Matthew. I've enjoyed this conversation with you. Although maybe it's been more one-sided. I don't know.
No.
But I hope this gives our listeners and viewers some food for thought as far as like where do you want to be performance-wise, right? Like, what are required shooting skills for concealed carriers, and how do we measure those shooting skills, our level of competence with those skills, in a reasonable fashion that kind of is that basis of I'm doing pretty well or I've got a lot of work to do. I mean, obviously, always getting better and a little bit faster and a little bit more accurate is always a good thing. And I don't want you to take the standards that I mentioned in the last like 10 minutes as get to that level and call it quits and say you're done, because I think that would be a terrible attitude to have about it. But I think that you can probably maybe start focusing on some other things once you know you can achieve these standards we've talked about in today's episode, meaning that maybe you can start branching out a little more into hand-to-hand combatives, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Krav Maga, maybe taking some other additional courses in other disciplines, maybe even classes about self-defense law and things of that nature, right? So my point is like, if you're going to carry a gun, you need to be competent in the use of that gun. And the standards I've proposed today, I think, are a pretty good judge or measure of what might be considered competent or not. All right. And it's not that we get to that level and say, cool, I'm USPSA B class, I'm done, I'm out, you know. But I think you keep pushing, okay, and try to get a little bit better. But again, I think it opens up the door to go, okay, I can focus a little less on the gun, and there's these other skills, these other things I need to work on, and I'm going to dedicate a little more time to those things now as well.
Yep. Personal assessment. It helps for personal assessment. Just figure out where you are, where your benchmark is, and try to get better over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, it doesn't make any sense to, like, if you're not actually measuring this stuff and tracking it, you know, like recording it some way, somehow, then it's kind of pointless. All right. So like I've got a notebook that has a bunch of notes in it, but I also have some things that I've stored in my Range Tech Bluetooth shot timer app, that you can save drills and scores and times and things in the Range Tech shot timer app. I'm working to try to get everything moved over to more of an electronic database performance. And I'll admit, I haven't always tracked things super precisely, but I always have with certain things, I always have a pretty good sense of where I'm at, even if I haven't always recorded it accurately. But I can do better, and I am doing better with a lot of that. And some of that's because it's so easy to save things with the shot timer app. So anyway, we got to wrap it up. Matthew, you're like, oh man, gotta get to bed.
I'm not that old, man, but
any last words, brother?
No, great info. I hope, or I know a lot of people got a lot out of what you're talking about. So great episode.
Yeah, you know, I appreciate comments like what Dale says here on Facebook. Good stuff. I've got a lot of work to do. Dale, I'm glad you recognize that, and I will say this much: you can absolutely do it. Put in the time, put in the work, and you will see improvement. So get after it, buddy. Yeah, guys, don't forget we have our 2021 Guardian Conference this year in September in Oklahoma City. Come train with us for 3 days. Take our courses and from our visiting instructors. Again, Larry Vickers and Matt Little and Spencer Keepers and Chuck Haggard and oh man, Sam Middlebrook's going to be there instructing too. Those of you that are familiar with Sam, he's a guest on our last month's Guardian Nation live broadcast, all that. So guys, come train with us. Okay, go sign up at guardianconference.com, and you're going to save big on that, as well as a bunch of other stuff if you are a member of Guardian Nation. guardiannation.com is where you go for that. So with that, I'm going to let you all go. Okay, take care. Have a great rest of your week and great weekend. And until next time, a reminder to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care.